So very happy you could be here today. We're in the process of taking our program live, and it does seem that we are live. So welcome. Good morning, everyone. We're so glad you could be here today. I'd like to get started by turning things over to Martha Morani, our friend at the Ivy Bookshop.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very special event with author Philip Stead about the beautiful book he and his wife Erin co-created, Amos, McGee Misses the Bus. This event is co-hosted by the Enoch Pratt Free Library. As Carly said, I'm Martha Morani from the Ivy Bookshop, and I'm thrilled to welcome students, teachers, and librarians from Baltimore City Public Schools, from Boys Latin School and Bryn Mawr School, the Midtown Academy, and St. James Academy. I'm hoping that we will hear from some of you later when we have time for Q&A. You can type your questions into the chat, but we're going to hold off on that for now. We'll do that later. I want to thank Carly Reigard from the Pratt for helping to coordinate this event. Hi, Carly. Good morning.
Hi, Martha, and thank you. As always, we are so pleased to partner with the Ivy on today's event. We'd of course like to thank Philip and Erin and Macmillan Publishing for bringing today's event to Baltimore. And we welcome all of the students and educators who are tuning in from across the city. Hi, welcome. We're so happy you're here. In a moment, I'll be posting 2 links in the chat. The first is a short form for teachers to complete. We'd love to know who's joining us today, and we'll also use the information provided to share future author events like this one. The second link is for students with their caregivers to enter a drawing to win a copy of Amos, McGee Misses the Bus. The library has lots of copies to give away, and we look forward to sharing those books with you, the students. But without further ado, Martha, I'd like to turn it back to you to introduce today's special guest.
Thanks, Carly. We are in for such a treat today. For years, Phil and Erin Stead have been asked if they would ever write another book about Amos, the lovable star of their Caldecott Medal winning book, A Sick Day for Amos McGee. For years, the answer was no. If they were going to continue Amos's story, it was going to have to be just the right timing, and we've gotten to that place in time. As with Sick Day, this book is about the power of kindness, first and foremost. Phil's words and Erin's illustrations offer a feeling of calm and comfort in what has been an unsettled time. I can't tell you how grateful I am for the gift of this new book, but you're not tuned in to listen to me, so I'm going to welcome Phil to the screen and say thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. I can't see all of you, but I can feel that you're there, and I'm very happy to be virtually in Baltimore with you. I'd like to talk to you today about bookmaking. So we are going to read the new story together, but I'd like to talk to you first about how I make books, the different ways that books can be made. I'm an author, and I'm also an illustrator. And I'm sure many of you know the difference between those 2 words. An author is the person who writes the words of a story, and the illustrator is the person who does all of the artwork. Now, if you'll give me 1 second here, I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can see some pictures. So let's talk about making books. So first, here is a portrait of me. This portrait was made by my good friend, Matthew Cordell. Matthew Cordell is also an illustrator. His most popular book is a book called Wolf in the Snow, which is probably available in your library. It's definitely available at the bookstore. Matt is a very talented illustrator, but as I like to remind him, I actually have a lot more hair than this light bulb would indicate. So that is one thing that he needs to work on with his artwork. Matt and I have actually made books together. One of my favorite things about being a bookmaker is that I get to make books not just with myself, but with other people. So every artist has skills and abilities that, things that they're very good at. They also have things that they're not very good at. And so sometimes when I write a story, I know right away that I might not necessarily be the best artist for that story. And then I can ask one of my friends if I can have help. So the very first book that Matt and I made together is a book called Special Delivery. In this book, a little girl named Sadie is trying to deliver an elephant to her great aunt Josephine. Matt and I had so much fun making that book that we actually made a second book called The Only Fish in the Sea. This book was even crazier than the first book, and the first book was pretty crazy. We had so much fun making the second book, though, that we actually made a third book that came out this year called Follow That Frog. This book is probably the strangest, funniest, and most unexpected book that I've ever made. So I really recommend asking your librarian if she or he can find this book for you. I'd love to share it with you, but today we'll be talking about Amos instead. Now, Matt, when he makes his artwork, he uses a process called pen and ink. So most pens that you might get from the grocery or from the art supply store or even from the office supply store have the ink inside of the pen. And you guys have all probably used a pen like that. The pens that Matt uses are actually dipped into ink. So he uses a bamboo pen, which is almost like a sharpened stick, like a piece of wood that's been sharpened to a point. He also uses calligraphy pens and quill pens, which are little metal tips. He dips those pens into a little tub of ink. And then to add color, he uses watercolor, very similar to the kinds of watercolor that I'm sure a lot of you have used, either in school or at home when you're making your artwork. One of the reasons I really wanted to make books with Matthew Cordell is because his artwork reminds me of my favorite artist from when I was a kid. My absolute favorite book when I was a kid was a book called The BFG, written by Roald Dahl and illustrated by a man named Quentin Blake. Quentin Blake also used pen and ink and watercolor to make all of his artwork. When I was a kid, I would try to draw like Quentin. And then later, when I became a college student and I was studying artwork, and then later when I became a bookmaker, I was still trying to draw and paint like Quentin. But what I realized is that although I do have the ability to draw and the ability to paint, I really can't do it like Quentin did. And so for stories that I really wanted the artwork to have that sort of Quentin Blake feel, I needed to find somebody who could work with me. And that's how Matt and I got involved with working together. So although sometimes I have to find somebody to help me with the artwork, I also often make the artwork myself for my book. So these are a few of the books that I've made where I made all of the artwork myself. One of my very first books was a book called Jonathan and the Big Blue Boat. In this book, I used a technique called collage. As I'm sure many of you know, collage is an art technique where you take lots of different pieces of paper and you glue them together to make one picture. So in the case of this book, I found old books and old maps, old notebooks that people had left at junk shops. A lot of this stuff I actually found in the city of Baltimore. Because at the time, my wife, Erin, was living in Baltimore when I started making this book. So I would often take pages from some of these books, I would tear them out, I would paint over them to make color. In the end, I would have a big stack of paper like this, things I'd drawn on, things I'd painted over, things that I'd found or add rubber stamps to. I would tear them up and I would put them all together and then make one single image with them. Now, it's one of my favorite ways to work, but not every book is necessarily the best book to be made using this style. Almost every book I do uses a completely different art style. So in the case of this book, A Home for Bird, I ended up using, instead of collage, crayons as the main art material. So very similar to the kinds of crayons you guys would be using in school or using at home. That's what I use to make this book. Now, as you all know, the thing about drawing with crayons is that although they're very fun to use, they're also very difficult to use because you cannot erase when you draw with crayons. So anytime I made a mistake with this book, I'd have to throw the picture out and start over again. So this book, even though it seems very much like the artwork was probably simple and quick to do, this book took me longer than any other book I've ever made. It took me 6 years to make this book. After I did drawings with crayons, I would add some paint as well. I used a kind of paint called gouache paint, which is very similar to watercolor, but it's a little bit thicker. And in the end, the pictures would look kind of like this. What I really liked about making this book and using crayons is that I got to try my best to draw the way that children draw. I love watching children draw, and I love, I have a 4-year-old daughter. I always keep her artwork around my studio because her artwork is always inspiring to me. One thing that I think children really understand that grown-ups often forget about artwork is that art does not have to be perfect in order to be beautiful. In fact, it can be the opposite. A thing that isn't perfect often is beautiful because it's not perfect. And so with this artwork, I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was trying to be fun, trying to be loose, and trying to enjoy making pictures in the same way that I enjoyed making pictures when I was a kid. This is another book that I made called Hello, My Name is Ruby. This book looks a little bit like A Home for Bird, but it actually uses completely different materials. In this case, I use chalk pastels. So these are very dry and dusty, just like chalk you might use if you're writing on a chalkboard. So dry and dusty that as you're drawing with them, sometimes they would actually crumble and fall apart. Now, I like to take 2 or 3 different art materials sometimes that normally don't go together and put them together to make an image in a way that is unexpected. So in this case, I took these very dry chalk pastels and I added very, very wet colored inks. So 2 things that normally wouldn't go together on the same page, something very dry and something very wet. And when they got put together, they made images that looked sort of like this. And this was a really fun way to work. But again, after I made this book, the next book wasn't necessarily going to work using this style. So here's another book I made after Hello, My Name is Ruby. This is called Ideas Are All Around. And this, I think, is probably my most unusual book. And one of the reasons it's unusual is because I don't just use one technique to make the artwork. I actually use lots and lots of different techniques. So some pictures are made using paint, some pictures are drawn, some pictures were made with collage. I even drew with crayons again on this one. So all kinds of different things, charcoal, chalk, anything that I had laying around the studio ended up going inside of this book. The book is about myself, actually. It's about myself and my dog, Wednesday. Wednesday is actually from Baltimore. We got her at the SPCA in Baltimore City. And she has been our best friend for many, 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 many years. And in this book, Wednesday and I take a walk through my real neighborhood. As I was making the book, I realized that one thing was missing. I really wanted people that were reading this book to be able to really see the things that I was seeing while I was walking around the neighborhood with my dog. And so I decided that I would also include photographs. So this book includes painting and drawing and collage and even photography. And I like to point out that I'm not a photographer. I am not an expert with a camera. It's not something that I would say I'm particularly good at. But again, things do not have to be perfect in order to be beautiful. Because I'm not an expert, I didn't even try to use a fancy camera. This camera that I used to make the book is just a very cheap and inexpensive camera that I bought at a grocery store. It maybe cost me about $50. And I've had it for many years now. It still works. I love it. If I had tried to use something very fancy, something very, very expensive, I probably would have been very nervous to take the pictures. But because I was using something that can just be bought at a grocery store, I didn't feel nervous about using it. It felt fun. It felt like no big deal at all. So here are 2 of my absolute favorite artists that I like to work with. On the left here is my wife, Erin, and on the right is my daughter, Adelaide. Adelaide is 4 years old. We live together in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is right there. I love living in Michigan because we're surrounded by water. I love spending my free time on the water. Here is Adelaide and Erin on Halloween. We celebrated Halloween by going to the Humane Society and visiting the animals there that were waiting to be adopted. So that was really fun. We like to spend time with animals whenever we can. This is a drawing that Adelaide made. So again, she's 4 years old and she's just learning how to draw. I love drawing with her, and wherever we go, we always try to make sure that we have sketchbooks and that we have drawing utensils like pencils or markers or crayons, anything like that, that we always have them nearby in case we see something that we want to draw. One of the best ways to practice drawing, and I'm sure a lot of you listening today love to draw, one of the best ways to practice drawing is to draw the things that you see. So of course, we all like to draw the things that we love. So maybe you love, a specific cartoon character, or maybe you love your dog. And so those things you'll of course want to draw. But if you really want to practice, what you need to do is spend time looking at things and drawing the things that you see. And what you'll find out as you do that is that everything becomes interesting once you're drawing it. Even a tree, even your computer, even a book, whatever you see, once you start to draw it, it will become interesting. And you'll learn something about it, and you'll also learn something about yourself as you draw. I love drawings made by children because they remind me to have fun as I'm doing it. Here is another drawing that Adelaide made. This is of a great horned owl. So sometimes when we're not sure what to do in the morning, we go to a nearby animal rescue. This is a place where animals, and in particular birds, owls, bald eagles, things like that, can go if they've been injured or hurt and they need to spend some time getting well before they're released back into the wild. This is one of our favorite places to go and draw. I think anytime you can be up close and near an animal and spend some time quietly drawing with it, that's one of the nicest things that you can do. So my wife, Erin, is also an illustrator, and we've made a number of books together. So books where I wrote the story and Erin made all of the artwork. Now, every artist has certain things that they're very, very good at, certain things that make them special as an artist. And I think the thing that makes Erin special is her ability to draw relationships between people and animals, or even animals and other animals. Erin loves animals. When she was younger, she worked on a horse farm. She's always worked around animals and spent time around animals. She's always had animals in her home and in our home, dogs and birds and turtles, things like that. Any chance we can get to spend time around animals, we do. And Erin is particularly good at drawing them. Now, this is what this book looks like when it's finished. So when you go to the bookstore, you go to the library, this is what you see. But I also like to show what a book looks like before it's finished. So this is what you see in the very few moments right after an idea has happened. So the very first time I had the idea for this book, Bear Has a Story to Tell, I picked up some paper, I picked up my pen, and I just started writing. And I like to show this because it shows that much like how the artwork is rarely perfect, the writing is rarely perfect as well. It takes a long time to go from these first drafts to the book that you finally get to hold in your hand. And it involves a lot of crossing out and a lot of ideas that maybe you think are good and then you realize they're not good. And you just have to write and write and write. And the important thing is to have fun the whole time. You don't have to worry about it being perfect. The more you work on it, the more it will become perfect. And if it never becomes perfect, that's okay too. The very first book that Erin and I worked on together was called A Sick Day for Amos McGee. Now, in this book, the main character is a man named Amos McGee who wakes up very early every morning and gets ready for work. He trades his pajamas for his work clothes. He makes breakfast for himself. And then he waits for the number 5 bus, which will take him to his job at the city zoo. Once he's at the zoo, he spends time with all of his very good friends. So he's friends here with the elephant who likes to play chess. and he's friends with the tortoise, who likes to run races. And the penguin, he sits quietly with the penguin because the penguin is very shy. He lends a handkerchief to the rhinoceros, who always has a runny nose. And he reads stories to the owl, who is afraid of the dark. One day, Amos wakes up and he's not feeling well. He decides he needs to stay home sick for the day. And the animals are quite worried when Amos doesn't show up, so they decide that they're going to leave the zoo. They're going to wait for the number 5 bus. And they're going to board the bus. And soon enough, they arrive at Amos's house, and Amos is very, very excited to see his friends. They then spend the rest of the day doing all the things they would normally do at the zoo, but now they're going to do them in Amos's bedroom. At the end of the day, they share a pot of tea. Then they read a story together before turning out the lights. And then everybody sleeps over for the night. So what I'd like to do now for a few minutes is I'd like to show you how Erin made the artwork for this book. So I'm going to take this image right here, the cover of the book, and show you all the steps that Erin went through to make this piece of artwork. So Erin begins, like many artists do, with something that's called a sketch. And a sketch happens very, very quickly. It's never meant to be perfect at all. This is probably about a 2 or 3 minute drawing that Erin does. And even though it's not perfect, you can still get a lot of information. So you see here, you've got an elephant, and the elephant is holding a little something in his trunk. You can see the penguin, and you can see a shape that, you know, if you didn't know better, you might even think it's a monkey, but it's actually Amos McGee sitting there. Then what Erin does is that she draws the same image again and again and again until it gets closer and closer to how she wants it to look. So if you look very closely here, you can actually see that there are 2 pieces of paper taped together here. And that's because as the sketches are happening, maybe one half of the drawing is going very well and the other half is not going very well. And rather than starting completely over from scratch, what you can do is you can just cut off the part you don't like, draw a new part on a different piece of paper, and tape them together. And that's totally fine when you're just working on sketches. Once Erin has a completed sketch, something that she's very happy with, she can now start to think about how she's going to add color. The way that Erin adds color to her artwork is using a process called woodblock printing. So this is a big square block of wood that Erin takes. It's about the size of the book itself. Then she takes out carving knives. These are very, very sharp knives that Erin uses to carve the wood. Here is an image of Erin actually carving one of her blocks. After she's carved an image into the block, so after she's carved the shape of an elephant or carved the shape of Amos, she then adds paint to the block. She uses a paint roller and adds color to the block just like that. This is what one of the blocks looks like after it's been carved and yellow ink has been added. So these are all the yellow stripes that are on the cover of the book. There's another wood block that's been carved with ink added. You can see the shape of the elephant, and you can see the shape of the penguin in blue there. And then of course, the shape of Amos's green pajamas. So after Erin has carved a block and added the paint, she takes a piece of paper, places it on top of the block, presses very, very hard with her hand, and then she peels up the piece of paper, and the paper looks something like this. So this is what a woodblock print looks like before the artwork is completely finished. You can see Amos's striped pajamas. You can see the shape of the elephant and the penguin and the red balloon and even the blanket that they're sitting on. Now, the very last thing that Erin has to do to finish the picture is actually quite simple. She waits a couple days for the paint to dry, and after it's dry, she gets out her box full of pencils and adds in all the details just by drawing with pencil. No different than the pencils that you guys would use in school or at home. So that is how Erin goes from the very start of an idea all the way to a finished picture that can end up inside of a book, or in this case, on the cover of the book. Amos McGee, A Sick Day for Amos McGee was the very first book that Erin and I made together. And we made it many years ago before most of you were even born. We waited a very, very long time to ever make another Amos McGee story. But in the last couple of years, we decided we were finally ready to add another story into Amos's world. And that story is this: Amos McGee Misses the Bus. And so I'd like to do now, before we open it up for any questions that anybody has, is I'd like to read this story to you. Now, this is exciting because today is the very first day that any children anywhere in the world have been able to read this story. So you are among the very first kids anywhere to hear this story and to read this story. The story begins here in Amos's bedroom. He's up very late at night. You can see the moon in the window, and he says, and it says, Amos McGee was too excited to sleep. All night long, he lay awake on his pillow, planning an outing for his friends. Of course, I'll have to finish chores early tomorrow, he said to a little mouse. And I must remember the umbrellas. Raise your hand in your classroom if you can see the little mouse that Amos is talking to. When the alarm clock clanged, Amos lowered his groggy legs out of bed and swapped his pajamas for a fresh pressed uniform. Amos set a pot of water to boil, forgetting, though, to light the stove. He sat down to wait for tea and, quite accidentally, took a nap in his kitchen chair. Now, quietly raise your hand again if you can see the mouse on either of these two pages. Beep, beep. Amos awoke with a start. Oh no, he said, checking the time. I am almost late for work. He grabbed his boots and his favorite hat and dashed out the door. Beep, beep. Amos raced as fast as his feet would carry him. If you look very closely in the door of Amos's house, you can see the tiny little mouse there trying to catch up to Amos to let him know that Amos has forgotten his lunchbox. And here we see Amos racing through the neighborhood, trying to catch up to the number 5 bus as it's driving away. He's running so fast that you can see that his hat has flown completely off of his head. And if you look all the way to the left and the bottom on the sidewalk there, you can see the mouse again, trying to catch up, carrying that lunch pail. Beep, beep. The number 5 bus disappeared out of sight. Amos hung his head. There will be no time for an outing today, he said with a sigh. Amos began his long walk to the city zoo. You can see his hat is still sitting there on the sidewalk. And the mouse is finally caught up to the hat, but I'm not sure if he's going to be able to catch up to Amos. Amos McGee arrived late for work. I hope you are not upset, he apologized to the elephant. It's just that I did not sleep well last night, he informed the penguin. And I missed the morning bus, he added to the rhinoceros. Which is why, he explained to the owl, I have lost my favorite hat. Amos yawned. By the way, he said, sitting down a moment to rest, has anyone seen the tortoise? The tortoise had stepped out for a bit of exercise. And there's the tortoise on his way, and he's encountering a little yellow bird. Amos McGee had fallen asleep. Amos is so tired, worried the animals. He works so hard every day. So while Amos slept, the elephant borrowed a broom and began to tidy up. The penguin gave friendly reminders not to wake the zookeeper. The rhinoceros made sure all the littlest creatures were fed. The owl instructed visitors on the importance of animal conservation. And the tortoise discovered a missing thing to bring to the lost and found. And there he goes back into the city zoo, still walking. And then, hooray, my favorite hat. Amos looked around and saw that his chores were done. Thank you, he said to his friends. There can be so many nice surprises in a day. He pulled the watch from his pocket and smiled. If we hurry, there is even time to catch the afternoon bus. And so they did. Here they are, all aboard the number 5 bus. And they didn't get off until the very last stop. And this book, instead of ending in Amos's bedroom, ends at the beach where they all get to watch a nice, lovely sunset. Now, I can't see or hear you guys in your classroom, but I think if you're very loud right now, I might be able to hear you. So can everybody just one time say, beep, beep? All right. Thank you, everyone. Now, we have some time for questions. If anybody has any questions about Amos McGee or any questions about making books or writing books or about anything at all, really.
Yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask your teacher to type them into the chat and I will be happy to read them off. But I'm going to start with a question of my own, which is that, as I said before, one of the things I love the most about the Amos books is that they're both very gentle and very quiet. And I have found them to be a balm in what have been unsettling, challenging times. So my question for you is, was that your intent? Was that your intent with your words and Erin's with her illustrations?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because after we made A Sick Day for Amos McGee, we were very hesitant to make a second Amos book. And one of the reasons we were very hesitant to make a second Amos book is that people really loved that first book. And we were worried about maybe doing something that would make them love it a little bit less. Like if we made a second book, maybe we wouldn't do it very well and people would be upset. But what we found is that in the last few years, it really felt like the world was getting a lot louder to us, and maybe even a lot meaner, less kind. And we, the two of us, really wanted to spend time in the world of Amos McGee. And we felt that if we wanted to step back into that world, then other people might want to step back into that world with us. So we were very careful. It took us a long time to make this book because we wanted to make sure that that we respected all the reasons that people loved the first book. And so hopefully people that love the first book will love the second book too.
Well, I can only speak for myself and say that I certainly do. And again, thank you for this gift. Thank you to you and Erin both. I'm curious if you have any, if either of you have a favorite animal that appears in both the Amos books.
So that's a good question. And we actually asked ourselves that question because when we made the new book, we wanted the one particular animal to be sort of like the star of the show. You know, Amos is really the star of the first book, but we wanted one of the animals to be the star of the show. And although we love all of them, they've all become family members almost to us. The tortoise, for some reason, is the one that we always sort of gravitate to, because
Yeah.
he's the only one that doesn't ever really seem too worried, and that's kind of inspiring to us. The tortoise just always seems kind of okay. And so this was really a book for the tortoise. That's why so many pages of the book are devoted to just the tortoise slowly walking until he finds the hat, and then he comes back to the zoo.
Right.
And he really solves the big problem with the book.
Yeah. I like that he, it reminds me of the tortoise and the hare. So he is just sort of there in the background doing what he's doing while other people are maybe working a little bit more quickly, but he gets the job done. You talked a little bit about bookmaking. At what point did you decide that you wanted to be a bookmaker? Were you very young?
Yeah, that's a good question. I knew when I was very, very young that I wanted to be an artist. And I would say when I was, in second, third, fourth, fifth grade, I knew that I wanted to be an artist, but I wasn't sure what that meant. I didn't know, did I want to be a painter, or did I want to be, a puppet maker or a potter, or all the different things that you can do in the creative world. But when I was in high school art class, and my art teacher gave me a little booklet that showed all of the steps in the process of making a book that was written by Maurice Sendak, who you may know from Where the Wild Things Are or In the Night Kitchen. Lots of books that you can still find in your local library or at the bookstore. When I saw that, something about it just spoke to me. And that was what, right then and there, I was 15 years old, I realized I want to make books for a living. Now, I was really lucky because my future wife, Erin, was sitting next to me in that same classroom, and she was having pretty much the same experience. And so we became friends when we were 15 and 16 years old, in part because we both wanted to make children's books, and we've been together ever since. And we've been making books together ever since.
Now, did you make books at that time? I know you talked a lot about the early books that you've made that have been published, but did you make books together even back then when you were in high school? That maybe never saw the light of day, that were just things that you worked on together, maybe for a school assignment.
Yeah, we did. We experimented, and what we learned is that making a book is a lot different. The challenges of making a book are a lot different than the challenges of just making a single picture. So every artist, whether you're 6 years old or 60 years old, understands the kinds of challenges you might have when you make one picture. What colors am I going to use? How big is it going to be? All these things you ask yourself as an artist. But there is also an additional set of challenges when you're making a book. If you make a character, you have to be able to draw that character in many ways. I'm going to reach behind me for a second and grab. This is something Erin made to help her make Amos McGee. So this is a little sculpture that Erin made of Amos before she drew any pictures at all. And the reason she did this is because, it's difficult to only use your imagination sometimes to draw. And so she could move this sculpture around and say, okay, well, what does Amos look like from this angle, or from this angle, or from this angle? And these are the kinds of things you have to do when you're making a book. These are the kinds of problems you have to solve.
Do you have any of the early books that you worked on together? Like, were they saved in a scrapbook or of some kind?
We do have a couple, but I think we'd both be far too embarrassed to show them to anyone.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think it's neat that you have them. Are you working on anything together now?
We are, actually. We're always working on books, and usually this sometimes is surprising to people. We work on more than one book at the same time. So we have about, I think, 4 different books that are happening in the studio right now. The one that I'm most excited about is a book called A Mule, a Milk Cow, a Miniature Horse. And it's about 3 animals who are very concerned because they're up in the morning, but the farmer has forgotten to bring them breakfast.
Oh dear.
And so they have to go on an adventure to find their breakfast.
And when will we see that published? Do you have any idea?
Probably 2 years from right now.
Okay.
Is when it'll finally be in bookstores.
And so how long typically, well, let me ask this about Amos McGee, Mrs. the Bus. How long from start to finish did that book take?
Yeah, so that's a good question that we get a lot, is how long does it take to make a book? And the answer is that it really depends on which book we're talking about. So some books, even if they look like they maybe were a little bit easier or the artwork could be a little bit quicker. So a book like A Home for Bird, the one that I made with the crayons, that book actually took me 6 years to make. And the reason it took 6 years is because I had so much trouble deciding how to make it in the first place. I made the entire book in black and white in pen and ink, and then realized that was wrong, threw it out. And then I tried to make the book using woodblock printing, similar to how Erin makes her books, and realized that wasn't going to work. And so again and again, I would make the book, throw it out, make the book again, throw it out. And that really adds a lot of time. In the case of Amos McGee, it was about 18 months.
Wow.
So about a year and a half to make all of the artwork for that book. And that's pretty common. I would say at least 1 year is how long it takes to make most books. So as long as you're going to be in first grade or as long as you're going to be in second grade is how long it takes us to make an entire book. So it's very important to be patient as a bookmaker. You can't make the book in a day and you can't make the book in a week. And there are going to be days where everything you do will be wrong and you're going to have to do it all over again the next day. So.
Patience. Will there be another book about Amos, do you think?
So while we were working on the second book, that was the question we were asking the whole time is, will there be a third book or will there be a fourth book or a fifth book? And it took us almost about 10 years to make book 2. I think there will be a third book and I'm hoping it will be less than 10 years.
Yeah, so am I. Speaking very selfishly, of course. I think we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon, but you've already offered some advice for aspiring writers. I just wanted to know if you wanted to add any advice for aspiring bookmakers. So writers, the kids who want to be illustrators, other than patience and perfection.
Sure, yeah.
Not necessarily your only goal.
So a lot of people that are interested in doing what I do for a living ask me, where do you get your ideas? How do you come up with ideas for books? And what I like to say is that I don't come up with the ideas for books. And anytime I try to come up with the idea for a book, I fail. So if I sit down at my desk and I think, okay, today I'm going to write a book, nothing will happen. So the way you come up with ideas for your books are that you go out and you live your life. You take a walk, you meet people, you talk to people, you try to be interested in everything. If you're interested in everything, then you and the things you make will also be interesting to other people. And ideas will come to you. You don't have to make ideas. Ideas will always come to you if you go out looking for them.
And be open to them. Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. And thank you for being so generous with your time, with your talent. Please thank Erin for us as well. We're also very grateful to Macmillan Publishing for giving us this opportunity to be included on this tour, to share with the kids before anybody else gets to see this book, because it doesn't technically come out until November 23rd. So that's an exciting thing for us to be able to offer to students here in Baltimore. Thank you to the Pratt for being our co-host today, and a great big thank you to all the students and the teachers and the librarians from the schools who joined us today. If you haven't already gotten a copy or pre-ordered a copy of Amos McGee, Mrs. the Bus, you can get one either at the shop at 5928 Falls Road after the 23rd of November, or you can order it online. I'm going to put some links into the chat so that if anybody wants to find out where they can order the book or look up your website or Erin's website to do the educator survey that Carly offered, or register for the drawing. Those links are now in the chat. But once again, thank you, Phil. We look forward to seeing you back in Baltimore soon.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Baltimore. Thank you, Pratt Library and Ivy Book